Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. You can tell a city's whole story by the way it moves water, where it hides it, where it has run out of places to hide it. On the night it started, I was in the Department of Environmental Protection control room in downtown Brooklyn. A glassed-in floor with a blue map of the city lit by 1,000 tiny LEDs. Pump stations, outfalls, tide gauges, sewer regulators. Every point flicked and pulsed on the wall the way a nervous person taps a foot. I was the overnight supervisor, a civil engineer by training and a glorified plumber by temperament. My name is Nate. If you've ever walked past a hissing manhole and wondered what kind of person gets excited about the pressure drop inside, I'm that person. At 2140, the battery tide gauge was already a problem. The NOAA screen showed the same trend every storm. Green line for predicted tide, red line for observed. The red line was hugging high and pressing north like it had something to prove. The National Weather Service bulletin on my second monitor was blunt. Slow-moving system, historic rainfall, storm surge on the late-night high tide. We'd already sent crews to the usual trouble spots. Hamilton Beach, Midland Beach, Red Hook. The Gowanus Canal had a dark, immovable look when I checked the live camera. A slick mirror under a heavy ceiling. 6th Street pump station shows 2 out of 4 offline, Ahmed said. He was on the next desk over, an MTA signal maintainer on loan to our shop when storms stacked up. He wore his hard hat even at the desk, a quiet superstition. Vibration alert, could be trash in the impellers. Text C-team, I said. Tell them to pull screens and bring a Godwin. The portable pumps were orange and stubborn and saved us on nights like this. They could move a small lake if you gave them diesel and love. Keep an eye on East River regulators, I added. I want them closed by 22:30, surge or not. My phone vibrated. A message from Alexa, paramedic Alexa Perez, FDNY EMS, who also happened to be my ex. It was a habit we never broke, storm night check-ins. You up? It read. Always, I sent back. You hearing anything about water backing into basements in Red Hook? We've got calls, people standing in the street in the pooling, like they're waiting for a bus. Not moving out of it even when we try to guide them. Standing in the street. The words were odd. The first safety rule on a night like this, and they teach it to kids. Never walk into floodwater. You don't know what's in it. Holes, power, sewage. Stay on the radio, I typed. I'll get you a status. What's your location? Van Brunton Beard, she sent. Triage set up by the market. I flagged Red Hook on the control wall and saw what I expected. Tide pushing up the outfalls, the sewers trying to equalize with the bay and losing. Ahmed, I said, look at tide at Erie Basin. Surge arriving early. He leaned in. It's bouncing. Could be Seiche effect, wind pinning it. He squinted at the FFT screen like a doctor deciding if a heartbeat was really a heartbeat. I don't like it. I'd like a lot of other things, I answered, and phoned the borough planner to request a preemptive closure of the Beard Street outfall. Even before I got through, the battery red line took a sharp step up. It made me swallow. When water is your job, you develop a hunch. The city is a system. Rain on rooftops, gutters to catch basins to mains. Combined mains carrying sewage and stormwater to regulators that decide, under the whip of tide and level sensors, whether to send flow to the treatment plant or to relieve pressure to the river. Pumps move what gravity can't. Valves decide what pumps can't. We call the big valves regulators, like they're wise old judges. In truth, they're just doors pushed around by math and pressure. My headset crackled. Control, this is C-Team. We're at 6th Street. Screens are loaded. We're pulling. Also seeing people. The tech paused. How do I put this? People just standing in the alley, calf deep in the water, staring. Won't respond when we shout. One guy smiled like he heard music. Any injuries? I asked. No, just not moving, kinda off. Alexa texted again. These folks in the water, skin is greyish, but not cold, not shocky, just fixed. And they won't let go when you try to pull them to curb, like they're anchored. I typed fast. Could be low oxygen. CO from generators, hydrogen sulfide. Move them away from enclosed spaces. Put them on oxygen. We're outdoors, she wrote. Air's fine. Call Deutsche H, I told Ahmed. Get public health on with us. And ping Con Ed. We need to make sure no feeders are energized in those zones. Then the radio lit up in the wall rack, and I realized we were late to a different party. PD to citywide. Be advised high water on West Street from Canal to Albany. Subjects in the roadway refusing orders to move to median. They're not aggressive. They're not responding. Request EMS. FDNY to dispatch. Multiple ERS alarms in Chelsea, Hudson Yards. High water. Occupants visible at the stoops. Not entering. Just fixed. I looked at Ahmed. He looked back. He turned his hard hat brim forward like a knight lowering a visor. This is one of those nights, he said. Every night is one of those nights, I said, because I'm a liar when I'm afraid. By 22:30, the surge was speaking in a loud, clear voice. It came up the harbour, pushed by wind and pressure, and chuckled into the city's throat where the sewers touched the sea. The regulators closed as programmed, but you can't stop the oldest law. Water finds a level. It forced its way into every loose joint, every hole left by a forgotten conduit, every crack the apartments above had never noticed. Stormwater backflowed into basements. The city began to clear its throat in wrong places. When the level popped a manhole, the cover didn't flip dramatically as in movies. It just bobbled and let a shimmering tongue of water bleed up, quietly, persistently, until it filled the street. At 22:47, the line from Brooklyn Navy Yard showed a red dot, overflow. At 22:51, the East River level sensor on the Williamsburg Bridge anchorage pinged a weird little glitch in salinity and temperature. For a second, in the data stream, it looked like the river had hiccuped. We'd seen those anomalies before. Hot industrial discharge. A boat stirring up the water column. But the pattern kept repeating, every couple minutes. A fingerprint the algorithm didn't recognize. Ahmed took a screenshot and frowned. What do you think? I asked. Inflow from somewhere unusual, he said. Canal water. But it's too fast. Maybe submerged cars warming the water. Probably nothing. He rubbed his face. Probably something. At 23:03, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, then saw the tag, USCG Sector New York. This is Perez at DEP, I said. Evening, Engineer Perez, a calm voice replied. This is Petty Officer First Class Haynes with Sector. We're fielding unusual calls about persons in the water along the promenade in Battery Park City, not swimming, standing in shallow floodwater, not responding to hails, no apparent distress. We're also getting boaters on 16 reporting floating groups near Pier A. We've got crews en route, but we're calling city agencies in case it's infrastructure or outfall related. Night of 1,000 surprises, I said. We're seeing similar across Brooklyn. Any sign of contamination, sheen, odor? Negative, Haynes said. Water's turbid, like you'd expect. No rainbowing. Copy, I said. If you can keep people out of the water, please do. There's live power and bad footing under that soup. We're broadcasting, he said, and I could hear the sea in the way he said it, the practiced patience. Stay safe. Alexa again. They keep coming out of the side streets, Nate, like they were in basements and walked right into the water and then just stop, eyes open, quiet. They look at us and then past us like they're waiting for an announcement. Don't touch the water with bare skin, I sent, before I realized how late that warning was. Gloves, boots, keep your folks up on stoops. She sent back a thumbs up, then a line that sucked the heat out of my hands. One of my crew brushed a guy's sleeve and it felt sticky, not the fabric, the person, like there's something on their skin. He's okay, washing, Public health on 2, Ahmed said, and I patched the doctor into our channel. He was a tired voice with an epidemiologist's measured cadence. I gave him our reports. There's a possibility you have hypoxia from environmental gas, he said, but outdoors makes that less likely. Could this be an irritant exposure? Something aerosolized from the sewers entering through floor drains? Air feeds are normal, I said, but I can't swear to house interiors. I described the surface observations. Standing in floodwater, inattention, calm affect, clinging. I didn't say the other word forming in my throat. No one did. It was too early, and we were rational people, and we'd rather say 10 complicated phrases than one simple one that would make everything unreal. Treat with caution, the doctor said. Avoid contact. Assume an environmental hazard until proven otherwise. He paused. Do any of your treatment plants report anomalies? I pulled up the influent readings at Owl's Head, Newtown Creek, Red Hook. Spikes, I said. But the whole night is spikes. We're in combined overflow. Understood, he said. Keep us updated. At 2340, the Hugh L. Carey tunnel started to take water. We're not responsible for the tunnels. MTA Bridges and Tunnels maintains that monster. But water doesn't sign union cards. It goes where it wants. Cameras showed the familiar white tile, the neat line of fluorescent light waking into refracted bars as the floor darkened. The operators closed the floodgates, but you can't outthink a tide already inside your walls. The storm was a shrewd burglar. It had found the seams. I made a call I'd always dreaded and hoped I would never have to make. I asked for pre-stage closures of minor regulators on the canal. We were going to trap water in the streets deliberately, so it wouldn't run backward into the river and into people's homes. That meant certain blocks would drown while others breathed. That kind of math stains you. You carry it. Then Ahmed said something in a small voice that didn't sound like him at all. Nate, look. He was pointing at the Gowanus camera. The brown canal had a faint sheen, like it often did after rain. The industrial ghosts oily and reluctant. But the camera on the 3rd Avenue Bridge caught the street at the edge of the frame, and in the sheet of water sliding past the curb, you could see shapes rising up as if stepping from a pool, not climbing, not clawing, just standing, as if startled awake into a bright room. 4 shapes, 5 people. They took a hesitant step forward, and then they stopped on the double yellow. They looked down as if considering the paint. One tilted their head, listening. It was the stillness that made it worse. Not a statue stillness, more like the way you freeze in a doorway when your name is called from a far room. I zoomed the feed until pixels turned into blocks. Ahmed whispered, "The water's cold. Why would you stand? Why not move out?" "We don't know what we don't know," I said, my voice automatic. "We just don't go near them." He nodded. The hard hat brim cut a line across his eyes. "Sure," he said, "but we live near them. We lost the first employee at midnight. I know his name, I know his family, and I will spare them by saying only that he worked at a small station near the Navy Yard, and he was as careful as any of us." He texted the group chat that the station basement smelled like 100 wet coins. He went downstairs to check the pump starters and didn't answer the radio for 2 minutes. His partner found him standing on the bottom step, one hand on the handrail, his boots in water. His face turned toward the whir of the big pump like someone listening to an old love song drifting through a vent. Eyes open, breathing, smiling a barely there smile. His partner called his name softly. He didn't blink. He didn't respond. He was gentle when they guided him up. He let them move his hands, but he wouldn't step aside from the drain at the landing until they worked as a team to lift him. He looked down at the water's meniscus sliding away and made a sound that, in my nightmares, is a word I never want translated. We got EMS and public health to that station within 11 minutes. 11 minutes is nothing on a storm night. It felt like 11 hours. Alexa messaged me from the curb. Pulse strong. Pupils a little small maybe. The sticky sensation is real. Not slime, like a fine residue on the skin. No rash. Vitals decent. We're putting him on a board as gentle as we can. He relaxes if you move him toward the water, tenses if you move him away. It's like a magnet with a soft pull. I texted back a thumbs up because I had words, and none of them were helpful. I had a job: keep water from rising where it shouldn't, and the water was rising everywhere it shouldn't. At 0:15, the Con Ed East River plant took protective actions, shedding some load to keep transformers safe. Lights flickered from Alphabet City to Williamsburg and then steadied. The canal rose another inch. At 0:25, the alerts from the Staten Island South Shore flashed to yellow. Water in basements. Subject behavior matching Brooklyn and Manhattan. Reports came in from Coney Island and Midland Beach within minutes. Up on Harlem River Drive, a traffic cam caught a man stepping off the curb into the flooded lane and then standing there calmly while cars hiss by in deeper water, slowing as drivers, New Yorkers of instinctive kindness, put their hazards on and rolled their windows down to shout, "Hey, move up!" He turned and looked not at the cars, but at the wake trailing the back of a city bus. He seemed to admire it. "We need ICS," my director said, voicing the obvious. The city's Emergency Operations Center came alive on our feeds. The virtual ICS 201, building itself in a shared document. Incident commander from OEM, safety officer from FDNY, operations branch with PD, sanitation, DEP, DOT, MTA. A planning section spun up a situation unit and a threat assessment unit. Logistics called fuel vendors. Finance opened resource tracking. The words were familiar and comforting because they were rules. When the world becomes a rumor mill, rules are the last radio station you can pick up. Public message? OEM asked. Keep out of floodwater, we said. Don't approach people standing in floodwater. Call 911 and 311 for reports. If water enters your home, get to higher floors. If you can safely turn off power at your main breaker, do so. We said, don't be a hero, not out loud, but I thought it hard enough to shake my bones. At 1 o'clock, I left the control room. Someone else had to run the screens and the numbers, and Ahmed could hold the place like a levee. I went to the field because I am the sort of fool who needs to touch a problem to understand it. Also, Alexa was in the field, and the part of my brain that still believed in us didn't like that idea. I drove a city truck down Flatbush under the shimmering rain, past manholes that bubbled like kettles. At Burham Place, I turned toward the canal and then couldn't go farther because the water had turned the street into a mild river. I parked high and pulled on my waders. I kept my gloves on even when I wanted to text. The rain had warmed a degree in the last hour, that weird, heavy autumn warmth that always feels like the city just opened a bakery somewhere and the steam is out on the block. There were 3 people in the intersection ahead, and that sentence will always feel dishonest because I still think of them as people. They were people. They were a woman in a pale coat, a man in running shoes, a teenager in a knit cap. They stood in shin-deep water, equidistant like the points of a triangle. They faced different directions, but every so often turned their heads to the same angle, as though catching a low note. The streetlights drew long threads of yellow across the water. When a taxi pushed through farther down, its wake travelled like a slow animal. The 3 bodies swayed in the wake and then stilled again. I stayed 10 yards away. I spoke softly, not my name, not a command, just the kind of sound you make to a skittish cat. They all looked toward me at once. Their faces were calm, not empty, calm. The teenager had a spot of something dark at the corner of his mouth, and I forced my eyes away like I was obeying a museum sign that said not to touch. The man blinked slowly, and the blink felt like a door closing in a draft. "Can you hear me?" I asked, hands out at my sides. "I'm here to help you to the stoop, okay? We'll get you warm." They didn't move. When the wind shifted and sent a thin wave over the tops of their shoes, all 3 let out a sigh at the same time, like they were listening to a song that finally resolved to the note they wanted. Not a moan, not a growl, a contented sigh. It pierced me in a way fear never has. Behind me, a flashlight found my shadow, and Alexa said, "That's as close as you're going to get, Natito." I'm not in the water, I said reflexively, and she laughed in a way that said she recognized the defense mechanism and forgave it. Her crew had staged a folding table under the market awning on Van Brunt, saline and blankets, oxygen and BP cuffs. They were mostly watching and keeping neighbors on their stoops. New Yorkers geographers by temperament were already mapping the safe high ground on their block, shouting offers of towels and phone chargers. We tried guiding them, Alexa said quietly. They resist, but not violently. They hold your sleeve. The contact turns your arm tacky where they touch, not mucus. Like the mineral deposit on a shower head when you haven't scrubbed it in a while, but softer. Please stop making metaphors, I said, because it was soothing to say anything ordinary. Any fevers? A paramedic named Chen shook their head. No, strong pulses. Some are dehydrated probably, but they refuse water unless you set it in the floodwater and let it cool. Of course they do, I said, because the universe likes its themes. What is this? Alexa asked. She looked over my shoulder at the three in the intersection who were now watching an overflow gutter as if it were ballet. What do we call this that we can say on the radio without starting a panic? We call it a mass environmental exposure with unusual behavioral features, I said, like a bureaucrat, because sometimes the most human thing you can do is hide inside jargon. We call it a water event. We say keep back. We say stay dry. We put up tape like it's meaningful. Will tape hold? She asked softly. Nothing holds water, I said. Phones find each other, and so do rumors. By 2 o'clock, there were videos. You know the ones. A shot out a fourth-floor window of a flooded block. The water, a light-struck sheet, and figures in it like chess pieces made of fog. A shot from a subway kiosk of a stairwell with water stepping down each riser. A silver cascade. And a person standing halfway down in that rain from below, head tilted toward the drum of a pump across the street. A shot from a corner store security camera of a man in a hoodie standing in the door with water at his ankles, looking at the sloshing mop bucket as if the bucket were a friend telling a joke. The city's official social channel posted its firm list: avoid floodwater, shelter above ground, do not enter subways, do not approach affected individuals, call for assistance. The phrase affected individuals was a mercy and an accusation. My phone vibrated with the mayor's press time. My radio breathed the measured voices of people who practice keeping their pulses in their voices. Copy that. Staging at the school gym. We need 5 cots and a pallet of water and a charging station. The word pallet will always break my heart. It means we are pretending to be efficient as a way to survive feeling small. We get paid to imagine failure. That's essentially what engineering is. So when the calls came in that certain stormwater regulators weren't responding to SCADA commands, the little control system pings that keep motors opening and closing doors miles away, we already had the when that happens plan. Cut power locally to freeze valves in place. Dispatch crews to handwheel where possible. Throw sandbags as the ancient fallback. But it is an unsettling thing to stand in a pump station and watch a panel of lights inform you that a door you cannot see stayed open when you asked it to close. It is worse to suspect the reason is not a circuit, but a person who decided to stand in the wrong water. At 2:20, Ahmed called me from the control room, voice tight. Joralemon Street tunnel is showing water intrusion. That tunnel's sealed, I said on reflex, because facts are my rosary. They hardened it after the last storm. It's sealed until the river raises it like a boat, he said softly. Sensors are pinging weird salinity, and signals are, look, I don't want to scare you, but the software doesn't understand what it's reading. Something is oscillating near the sensor. The pattern looks like a person standing there swaying. Stop looking at it like art, I said, because that was what I'd started to do too. Ascribe intention to graph noise. I'm sending the recording to the analysts, he said, and also to you, because I'm not going to be the only one who sees ghosts in sine waves. Copy, I said, and the ghost arrived on my phone, a neat little animated graph, salinity rising and falling in a human rhythm. If you've ever watched a tide gauge, you know water can have a pulse. It was that, and it was not. We need to isolate low spots on the system, I said, rolling back into work. We need to keep water in the streets where it can't get down into the bones. You going to tell the streets that? Ahmed asked. His sarcasm tasted like friendship. Get me a list of valves we can freeze open at high ground, I said. I'll go throw the brake on anything I can reach. Nate, he said softly, as if saying my name could be an anchor. We're good at this. We're not good at this. But we're still good at the part where we work things until they yield. Copy, I said. 1 block at a time. I worked down Smith, into Carroll Gardens, and then up toward Nevins. The rain drummed a tempo on the truck roof. The wipers clacked like a metronome sent to detention. The streets were half water and half confidence. People had that look you get in a city during a storm, when you and the strangers on your block suddenly form a small nation. Hands pointed, tape went up. Kids watched from windows, their breath fogging the glass. On Bond Street, a man waved me toward his stoop. He introduced himself as Evan and pointed toward his basement door with a laugh that had no humor in it. You have any idea why my sump pump keeps cycling when I shut the breaker? The float's moving, I can hear it. The water's ratio of air to liquid is making it spurious. He shrugged. Sorry, I was a process engineer once. Once a process engineer, I said, and he grinned for real for a heartbeat. We knelt above his stairwell and listened. He was right. The pump cycled, with power cut, because the float switch was bobbing on the surface of what should have been still water. The bob was regular, like a breath. I have a neighbor down there, Evan said. He owns the cellars under the stoops. He's stubborn. He went down when the water started and hasn't come back. I tried to cool down. He said, it's fine, like he was talking about a cake that needed 5 more minutes. I shone my light down the stairwell. The water was black. The beam caught flecks like snow. On the 3rd step, just above the surface, a hand rested, palm up. Fingers curled like someone had fallen asleep during a lecture and kept their place in a book. The skin was pale in a way that looked like a trick of the light. The hand did not twitch when the light found it. The surface of the water bulged as if something below had exhaled, or a passing truck had sent its tiny wave through the concrete. The float switch lifted and the pump tried to spin against a breaker that was already open and failed with a soft thunk, like a polite fist on a quiet door. Don't go down, I said. Don't talk to him from the waterline. If you have to speak to him, go to the side window and keep the glass between you. And if he asks you to bring him something, say you will and then go to bed. That last part sounds like a relationship tip, Evan said in a cracked voice. It is, I said, and he nodded with a breath that was almost a laugh. And we were people again for a moment, and not a city on a table with a hand at its throat. I closed 3 valves by hand between Nevins and 2nd Avenue, and each wheel felt like turning the planet. At 3 o'clock, the planning section's map showed how we were herding water. It is a strange sensation to play shepherd to something that is already more shepherd than you could ever be. The canals rose and we pulled their edges back. The sewers pressed and we gave them sacrificial blocks for release. I thought of old maps with blue lines drawn by dead men under kerosene and the joy of seeing where a spring would go if you let it. At 3:30, Alexa called. I pressed my radio to my ear, my glove squeaking on the plastic because it was wet, because everything was. I'm at the Navy Yard, she said. OEM set up a small staging at Building 77. We're moving ambulatory people out of the low spots in Fort Greene. We're using the wide staircase because there's an echo in the elevator shaft, and people in the water keep looking at the elevator doors, like they're listening for something. How are you? I asked. I had worse nights, she said, which was true in the way you say true things to help yourself. I'm with a group heading to the ferry landing. The Coast Guard thinks we can move folks by boat to higher ground on the other side if needed. They're worried about cars. People keep stopping their cars in water to film, and the wakes are pushing against doorways where we just move people to safety. Tell them to be brave and park, I said. Tell them they can go viral for kindness later. "Nate," she said, "I have to ask, the folks in the water, they look at each other sometimes and then look away like they're shy. And when they do that, the water around their legs ripples, not because of wind, like the water's listening back. We don't know what we don't know," I said, and she made a tight noise in her throat, not agreement, not dissent, just being a mammal in weather. "Meet me at the ferry if you can," she said, and cut off. The ferry landing at the Navy Yard is a piece of problem solving I always loved. Turn water into road. The aluminum gangway was slick with rain. The river was the river, a thing that interprets gravity and wind into an opinion. The ferry captain that night was a woman named Talia, who I knew by reputation. She had a voice like good rope, and a posture that told you she trusted her boat more than any sentence. "We're running through to 34th Street, she said. "Plenty of headroom, wind's manageable, tugs are keeping lanes clear, Marine 1 is out, and Coast Guard's standing by. We'll move 6 dozen per trip. No contact with those in the water, and no one comes aboard wet above the shin. If they're drenched, we stage them to be washed off with clean water first and wrap in dry blankets. Doc is sending trustees to help lift. Bless everyone who ever invented a blanket," I said, and she laughed briefly. The first group came along the pier in a knot, led by Alexa and a young officer whose vest said ESU. He had the controlled, hands-down calm of someone who'd learned to accept that his emotions weren't going to help the physics of a hallway. His name badge said M. Park. "We've got 26 ready to board," Alexa said. "We left the folks in the water alone, like you said. We set cones up to suggest a line from the curb to the stoop, so people don't push floodwater into the first floor apartments we just dried out." "Clever," I said. "It felt like lying to the water," she said, and I didn't know what to do with that sentence, so I put it away like a letter I'd read later. On the second ferry load, when the engines eased and the hull pushed aside the East River, there was a tremor in the water. A slow, sinuous wake that didn't belong to our boat. It came from the direction of the Brooklyn Bridge, where the footpath had emptied hours ago, and the stone held rain like a church holds sighs. The tremor washed across us, and on the pier, the few affected standing in shin water let out their soft, unison exhale. We all heard it at once, and the hair on everyone's arms stood up like the city had just told a secret. "What's the common factor?" Officer Park said quietly. "Floodwater contact, lowlands, basements, and the behavior changes are mostly at the interface. They don't climb, they don't go upstairs. They find where the water lays, and they lay there too." "They're not hostile," Alexa said, and I loved her for saying it like she was reading scripture. "They're not hurting anyone directly. The danger is the water and power and cars. Also the sticking," I said, "whatever is on their skin." She looked at me long in that way she had, when she wanted me to deliver an easy answer I wouldn't give if it wasn't true. "What's your water engineer brain say, Nate?" "My water engineer brain says we changed the city with pipes and sumps and outfalls, and we trusted that everything we sent away would become someone else's later problem. Tonight, later came home." "Can you stop it?" she asked. "I can interrupt it," I said, which is the same as hope if you say it with enough spine. By 4 o'clock, the rain lost a little temper, the wind shifted, the surge had crested and was hanging on, unwilling to back down, but no longer marching. This is the most dangerous hour for hubris. You look at a graph and think, we made it change. You didn't. The storm decided to be kind. Your job is to act like you did it anyway, so you keep doing the things that keep you from having to say thank you to luck. OEM pushed a proposal we all saw coming. Isolate the worst basins by sealing gates at key junctions. It would keep the river from pushing inland. It would also turn certain blocks into bowls. The geography team had overlaid topography and building use and came up with sacrifices we could live with. Industrial blocks, vacant lots, wide boulevards. The logistics team promised high clearance vehicles and portable sanitation for everyone on the dry islands we'd make. PD promised barriers. Sanitation promised sand for doorways. The ferry crews promised runs as long as the boats could thread and the crews could stand. Do it, I said, because my title and the chair I sat in at work gave me that power for the hours the city needed the fiction of authority. Freeze these, leave these open. I named blocks like you name pets, tender and ruthless. Then the threat assessment unit cut in softly. We're receiving early lab data from environmental swabs in areas where affected individuals stood. It's preliminary, don't alarm, but there's an unknown filamentous material present at the waterline. High affinity for keratin, not reactive to standard disinfectants. It's cohesive in water. It breaks into sleep when dry. It does not appear to be airborne. It responds to vibration. What kind of vibration? Ahmed asked over the shared call, and his voice was the curiosity that keeps us alive. Low frequency, the scientist said. The test isn't sophisticated yet. It's like it perks when you hum a bass line. A pump, I said, and thought of the pump rooms and the hum that makes your ribs buzz when you stand on the grate. The stuff liked the music of moving water. It ignored our voices and loved our machines. Public health added carefully. We cannot say infection. We can say colonization at the interface of skin and water. It sloughs with some friction. Soap helps, but not bleach. Heat helps. Drying helps. If you have to decontaminate, use warm soapy water. Friction. Rinse with clean. Don't abrade. Don't aerosolize. Treat floodwater as an environmental hazard. Affected individuals show signs of sensory prioritization for water movement and low-frequency sound. They can be guided away from hazards if you create a louder lure elsewhere. You're saying we can herd them, Officer Park said, professional and sad. We're saying you can probably guide them with sound, Public Health said. We're testing frequencies. Please do not place speakers in floodwater without isolation. Electricity is still a thing. Sometimes the world gives you a handle and daring you not to pull it. We pulled. The first lures were crude. DOT has portable message boards with solar panels and a loudspeaker for emergency alerts. We wheeled two to the edge of a flooded supermarket lot in Sunset Park and set one to a low, steady tone, like a foghorn dropped an octave and laid on its side. The four affected in the lot stopped watching the rain drip from the canopy and turned in unison. They walked, measured and slow, toward the sound. When they reached the shallow water where the speaker cable ran, they stopped. They stared at the water over the cable like it was a threshold, then lifted their feet, 1, 2, and stepped to stand directly over the line. They swayed like reeds in a vanishing wind. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't grotesque. It was extremely strange. And that's a category we tend to call ugly, because we have to put it somewhere, and beauty is already full. Do they attack? A neighbour in a raincoat asked Chen, who was writing vitals on a laminated sheet and trying to keep the marker from washing away. They don't, Chen said, and the relief in the neighbour's face was a flood. The danger is the water. You slip, you fall, you get a cut, you get an exposure. They hold if you grab them, and that's dangerous because of the sticking. So we don't grab, we guide. What are they? The neighbour asked. They're us, Chen said, which was true as poetry, which is the only way true works on certain nights. In Red Hook, we used a flatbed truck with a salvage speaker and a phone loaded with a tone generator app to draw a group away from a live manhole. They moved with a quiet eagerness, and when the truck rolled forward, the water made a softer sound under their shoes as it moved, and they sighed. And I looked up at the dark windows and knew a dozen people were filming this and would post it with captions full of words we hadn't decided on yet. At 5:10, the surge laid back a little, the red line on the tide gauge flattening into a straight refusal to go higher. The rain slowed to a mist. The city took a breath the way you do after a coughing fit, cautious, a little afraid of the next spasm. Sunrise in an hour, Ahmed said. We keep it together long enough for light. We get a morale bump. You speaking like a mid-pack marathoner, I said. I ran one half once, he said. I threw up behind a bodega. Heroic, I said. I was a hero to the raccoons, he answered. We laughed like sleep-starved co-workers laugh, and it did the small magic those laughs always do. I wish I could say sunrise fixed something. It didn't. It only made it visible. The world was the colour of wet cardboard when it came. The canal was an overbrewed coffee. The waterfront glowed with that orange sun that always looks like a prop until you stand in it. On the FDR, cars were abandoned neatly, as if the drivers had all agreed it was time to fold. In front of a school on York Avenue, a janitor leaned in a door and insisted in 2 languages that his foyer was dry and would stay dry as long as the students needed it. At 6:15, the first report came in that one of the affected had shifted. A young woman who had been standing all night in shallow water at a crosswalk took 3 steps toward a shop doorway, because inside the shop, a slop sink was running. Probably a leak past a bad valve, and the sound had convinced her. She tripped on the threshold and fell. The shop owner, a man who had aged 20 years since his first latte, went to help her up. Because of course he did, and she grabbed his wrist with a fierce tenderness. He said later it felt like the pull of someone trying to get him out of a pool to see a thing he would love. He couldn't pull away. He didn't want to. He didn't dislike the feeling. He liked it. That's the sentence I write and delete and write again, because it is the one the world will argue with. He liked it. He liked being held in that direction that way. He liked the way the water sounded against the threshold, the board creak, the low gurgle. He was saved because his wife, who had spent 20 years telling him to stop letting the sink drip, pulled him back by his belt and scolded both him and the water with the same tone. Public health updated their language. Avoid skin-to-skin contact with affected individuals. The surface residue exhibits adhesive properties that increase with proximity to water movement. Clean with warm soapy water. Do not use solvents. This appears to be an environmental organism of unknown classification. It is not airborne. It may disassemble when dried. It reassembles in moving water. What is it? Alexa asked no one and everyone at staging. Is it algae, fungus, a microplastic with bad manners? Maybe it's loneliness, a volunteer said, and we let that stay in the air because it didn't help and didn't hurt, and everything at that hour either hurt or helped, and anything that did neither was a blessing. The ask came at 7 o'clock from planning, the kind of ask cities practice in tabletop exercises and never want to try in the world. We need to open the canal to the river fully on outgoing tide to flush the basins. If we don't, when the next rain band hits, the level will climb and we'll have nowhere to put it. If we do, we will send a large volume of water downstream quickly. We can time it to avoid ferry runs. We can coordinate with Coast Guard and Marine units, but we will have to move affected individuals from the canal edge, because if they're still in place, the draw will suck them down. They are people. We are not willing to treat them like debris. Can we guide them? I walked to the Carroll Street Bridge. The canal was sullen and thinking about its choices. 5 affected stood in a line along the parapet in the shallow film on the sidewalk. They had their hands at their sides like schoolchildren in a fire drill. When a gust of wind riffled the canal, they leaned slightly and then corrected with a shared little sigh. They were beautiful to me in that moment, and again that is a sentence I'm afraid to write. Beautiful in the way that people being wrong in the same direction can be beautiful when you love them anyway. Talia brought her ferry close and lay a horn note low and long. ESU had set 2 portable speakers to a pure tone that made my molars hum. We called to the affected and asked them to step back. They didn't move. We moved the sound. They followed the tone 4 feet. We moved it 6 more feet. They followed with the patience of sleepwalkers. We did not touch them. When one lost a shoe to the sticky on the asphalt, he bent in slow motion and took almost a minute to retrieve it, and the time stretched to the size of a block. We did not hurry him, because time was what he was giving us. Who decides, Nate? Ahmed asked from the control room over the radio, voice thin with distance, and with 1,000 screens between him and a street. When do we open? Tide tables decide, I said, and looked at the Noah graph that had been my deity my whole career. But I'll pretend it's me. so I can live with it. We keyed the valve sequence. Regulators opened in order. The canal changed tone, the way a sleeping person shifts in bed. Then it moved. The outgoing tide had arrived to argue, and the canal had decided to agree. The surface's little glints ran faster. The boats tied to the bulkheads moved like cows in a field, turning their heads to greet a train. The affected along the wall stepped backward and lifted their chins and breathed in that small shared breath. The outgoing tide tugged at my waders, and I understood deeply, bone deep, why you might want to follow that tug forever. We held the line with sound. The ferry blew her horn again. The speakers sang their boring, perfect note. We played bass lines we found on a government laptop. We made the city throb in a new way. The affected folks stepped back again. We moved them like you move foam on a pool, not with your hands, but with shapes you make in the water with your hands. The canal flushed. It carried what it carries, oil we pretend not to see, memories of long-closed factories, a new and terrible filament we had discovered the way you discover a word you wish you hadn't taught your child. We sent it out past the Buttermilk Channel, past Governor's Island, past the tugs whose captains nodded at us, because they are the last poets of the river, and they know when someone is trying. By mid-morning, the storm had spent itself in city limits. Upstate still fed us with all the stubborn rivers that come down the map, but the worst was past. The affected still stood where the water stood. They watched wakes, they admired gutters, they were quiet, they were not eating, they were not collapsing. A few accepted sips if offered in cups placed in water and then withdrawn. Public health said we could make shallow pans of clean water and set them in place, and then give people that water later. We became raccoons, washing our food before we ate it. It was silly and humane, and it worked. The word zombie showed up around noon in a comment on a video, and then in a lower third on a cable channel in another state. We didn't use it. We used affected. We used waterbound. We used words like that until we needed more. Every age invents a name for a thing that already had one. We worked until dusk, and then another night, and then another. The organism, because that is what it ultimately was, even if it had ambition like an idea, lost adhesion when people were dried and warmed and kept away from water noise. Those who had stood longest took longest to come back. You could watch it leave them the way you watch a fever leave a child. 3 breaths of doubt, 1 breath of relief, then a long sleep. Some of the waterbound woke in stairwells with a feeling like coming back from a daydream you'd been living in for years. Some cried. Some asked for the sound back, because our bodies are perverse and crave the thing that isn't good for them. Some laughed, embarrassed, asking if they had been difficult, and we said no, because it was true. They had been gentle. We had simply been terrified. We discovered practicalities, warm soapy water for decon, not too hot, pat dry, lotion for skin after, food and tea, light out of wind, space to sleep. Doctors watched heart rhythms, engineers watched river levels, cops watched the way a cordon can walk in backward if you don't tend it. People made jokes because it is our only reliable second language. We made a list of songs that worked as lures and blasted them at low frequencies from DOT trailers. No one agreed on the ethics of using a bass-boosted version of a 70s hit to move a cluster of waterbound away from a transformer pad. Everyone agreed that the transformer pad needed guarding. We tracked the organism. It liked the edges where sweet water met salt. It liked the low points in old neighborhoods where the cobbles remember horses. It liked the mouths of culverts where raccoons write their autobiographies. We found it less frequently where the city had moved aggressively to separate stormwater and sewage. The old combined system was its avenue. We logged and we mapped, and the map stopped looking like a crime scene and started looking like a patient's chart. We learned in the way cities learn, by failing small and loud. We lost people. There is no fiction, no euphemism for that. We lost a patrolman who stepped wrong off a curb while guiding and hit his head on a hydrant on his way down. We lost an older woman who refused to leave her husband standing in their foyer and held his hands until she fell asleep on her feet and slipped. We lost a child because there are always children in every story, and that's where you rage at the sky. We learned to build better rails, to put better tape on better cones, to station someone whose only job is to say, "Step back, Mom. Please step back, sir," and whose voice is a tired lullaby. We also saved. We saved hundreds by doing unglamorous things loudly and then quiet things well. We saved by turning valves in the right order and playing unlovely notes on portable speakers. We saved by wearing gloves and washing with soap and ignoring bleach and heroism. We saved by staying on the stoop, waving people back from the edge with a smile that didn't show our teeth, because baring teeth is sometimes a threat in the languages we don't admit we speak. On the fourth day, the sun came out in a way that wasn't an insult. The tide remembered to go out and stay out for more than a guilty minute. The smell changed from metallic to wet rock. The organism, which had seemed tireless, sulked and slipped away. It left behind peeling films on bollards that you could scrape with a putty knife and bag for analysis, and it left behind stories that people will tell wrong and right for years. Alexa and I walked Van Brunt where the first three had stood. The grocery had put out a sign. "We are open, we are kind, we are cash only until the card reader wakes up." The bodega cat reappeared with a look that said it would not be sharing its review of the emergency. Kids had chalked a hopscotch in an uneven U to keep feet up on the high points. It was a good idea and probably the birth of some future member of my profession. "You owe me coffee you can't drink," I told Alexa. "I owe you a lecture on communication that you'll ignore," she said. She looked at the gutter where the water still ran in a civilized silver. "You think it's over?" "I think it's changed," I said. "I think we met something that lives at the interface, and we've been building interfaces thinking they were walls. I think we'll separate more of our storm and waste flows. I think we'll put better traps in basements and better one-way valves on drains. I think we'll think longer about what we do upstream, because downstream lives in our house now. I think we'll call it something nice in papers and something spooky in bars." "And what about the people?" she said. "The ones who went under and came back. The ones who wanted to follow the sound. We'll check their hearts and give them tea," I said. "We'll tell them they were drawn to something that was not their fault. We won't shame them, and we'll return their belts and rings in a clean Ziploc and say funny things until they laugh, and that will be the moment the city truly begins to heal." "You're learning not to lie to me," she said, smiling sideways. "I have always lied to you," I said, smiling back. "I said I didn't like the way you made your eggs. I did. I said I didn't want to live in a fourth-floor walk-up. I did. I said I didn't want to do this job forever. I do, even on nights like that." She looked at the street, at the place where three people had stood looking at paint on asphalt like it was a horizon. "We're going to be hearing that sigh in our heads for a while," she said. "I already hear it in everything," I said. "You hear it in the open hydrant 2 blocks over. You hear it in the subway grate when a train passes. You hear it in a faucet you forgot to fully close. It's not haunting. It's just the city talking. We mistake communication for haunting because we prefer our cities silent and obedient, and that was never the deal." She linked her arm through mine. "We are not together. We are what you become with someone you trusted through a storm." We walked to the corner where a DOT worker was breaking down a speaker, carefully uncoiling cable like you handle a snake after a standoff. "You a musician now?" I asked him. He grinned. "I been one," he said. "City just finally gave me an audience." I looked down the block. Water was where water belonged for the moment. The storm drains gulped politely. A kid with a broom swept puddles into tiny rivers and announced to no one, "I'm the tide," as they guided them toward a crack between stones. On the control room wall, somewhere up in our building, the lights would be going from red to yellow to green. The battery tide gauge would be drawing a line that held hands with its prediction again. There would be a footnote on the NOAA log about an anomalous period, and the name of someone who had been asked to explain it in math. There would be a pump station tech somewhere who had kept a hand on the rail all night and finally let go, and would be embarrassed to realize she had left fingerprints in the dust. We walked to the canal. The surface had the lazy smile of someone full. The ferries moved like habits will never break. Someone had chalked a small heart on the bridge parapet and drawn a line from it down to the water and written, not in English, not in math, just in that universal graffiti hand script, a sentence that said, "Thank you for the river," and then, under it, in a different hand, with a different chalk, "But stay where you belong." "I can live with that diplomacy," I said. "It's the only kind we ever had," Alexa said. Weeks later, after the papers had named the organism a provisional Latin that meant "loves the lapping of water," and then changed the name because it turned out a different thing owned that name. After the hearings and the grants and the white papers that said what we already knew dressed in dignity, I went back to the control room on a different night of rain. The lights were polite on the wall. Ahmed was there, hat brim forward. "You see the thing about the pilot program?" he asked without looking up. "Which thing?" I asked. "Low frequency barriers at outfalls," he said. "Like sound fences. You hum at a pitch the organism hates, doesn't climb upstream." "We'll end up with whales," I said. "We'll attract whales to the Gowanus." "We could use more whales," he said. "Less raccoons." He handed me a printout, a tide graph, a rainfall plan, a new regulator schedule. "You going to stay in or go touch something?" he asked. "I'm going to learn to be a person who stays in sometimes," I said. "But I'm not that person tonight." He nodded. He knows me and my lies better than most. I went to the battery before the tide change. The promenade had been repaired where the river had rehearsed being a dictator. People walked with dogs that didn't care about hydrology. A saxophonist played under the colonnade, and his low notes turned my bones into tuning forks. The water shivered once and then was still, and then shivered once in my imagination, because sometimes you're never quite sure where a story ends and your fear begins. There is a line on the tiles there that marks a flood long ago. A civic vanity loved by school groups. Water reached this point, it says in bronze. And people pose their kids under it every year, like they are measuring them for a prize. I stood by it and put my palm against the cool column and felt the city hum at me like a friend on the other side of a door. People will tell it different ways. They will call it the flooded streets night. They will call it the softenings, if they are poetic, and if they are cruel, they will call it something casual like the water weird. Some will say it was the night the city learned it was fragile. Some will say it was the night the city learned it could move as one. I will tell it like this. We met something in our water that liked us too much. We did the things humans do when loved incorrectly. We set boundaries, we named, we guided, we sang, and we told stories in the morning so our children would know how to listen to the lower floors of rain. I still keep my waders behind my office chair. I still wash my hands with soap and not bravado. I still carry a portable tone generator on my phone, a relic of that night like a medallion from a pilgrimage. Sometimes, crossing a street after a storm, I'll hear a storm drain whisper in its metal voice and feel my body lean a degree in that direction. Sometimes I let it. I step closer. I look down where the water spins itself thin. I listen to the low note of the city singing to itself. Then I step back to the curb, because I am not water, and I have work. And there is always someone on a stoop waving someone else back with a tired, kind hand. When people ask me what saved us, I say, boredom. We played the dull note that led them away. We turned the same wheel we have turned for a century. We told the same message over and over. Stay dry, stay up, stay kind. We stocked the same blankets, made the same tea. We did not invent a cure. We invented a compromise and wore it like a life jacket until the tide turned. And when people ask me if I think it could happen again, I don't look at the tide gauge, or the forecast, or the calendar. I look at the line on the wall where the bronze says, water reached this point. and the newer line below it, chalked by a child with an unsteady hand after the storm that reads, "Water came here too." And I say, yes, because water keeps its promises, so should we. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.